behalf of the Milken Institute School of Public Health at the George Washington University, thank you very much for coming. I want to thank especially Dr. Sharma for flying across the world and providing really what I think will be seminal information to not only help our country look at this issue, but on a personal level, I think it will be the catalyst for the university to start developing some projects in this area. That's my hope. So, of course, Dr. Davis, who, if you don't know her now, she is the rock star of the environmental movement in this country, just in case you want to know. I would like to read her accomplishments, but we only have 2 hours, so I'm not going to go there. But she's known in the academic world, she's known in the policy world, and now she's our rock star for the environmental movement. So I just am so happy you're here. And without further ado, we will start with Dr. Davis. I want to remind you to turn off your cell phones, please. And if you haven't already picked up the little flyers at the front, please do that on your way out. And we'll have time for questions at the end, so you want to hold on to those. And we'll get through the materials, and then we'll definitely have some time at the end for you to actually speak with the speakers as well, if you like. So thank you again.
In my presentation today, I'm going to briefly review what cell phone radiation is, what little evidence we have for the effects of cell phone and wireless radiation on children, and what evidence has driven other authorities to take certain steps that need to be more broadly understood, including the recent unanimous passage of the Right to Know law by the Berkeley City Council, which said that information currently buried in your phone should be made more easily accessible. And believe it or not, the industry just yesterday has filed a lawsuit challenging the fact that the city is compelling them to tell you information that is currently buried in the phone as a violation of their First Amendment. And we're pleased that Harvard Professor Lawrence Lessig and Yale University Dean Richard Post are joining in defending the city of Berkeley on this issue, which has the makings of a Supreme Court lawsuit on the very basic question of what does it mean to have a right to know in a democracy. I should add that my own personal view, of course, is that democracy depends on the consent of the governed to freely consent to be governed. And if you are denied information about agents with which you are exposed on a daily basis, then you can't really consent to be governed by those who set standards for those agents on your behalf. Let me just briefly acknowledge that we have a number of important senior advisors to Environmental Health Trust. I've indicated some of them here. Obviously, I am honored to have my colleague, Dr. Sharma, here, and I'll take this moment to tell you a bit about him. He's a physician. He has a doctorate as well in epidemiology. He is a very distinguished researcher who has been a prolific and important investigator for the Indian government for several decades and has led their research on male reproductive health, which is how he got interested in this. He became convinced from the work that he had done on male reproduction that cell phone radiation might well have an effect on male health. And indeed, he will talk with you today about that as well. He is the Deputy Director General of the Indian Council of Medical Research. And that is a very senior position, which puts him in a position of coordinating the efforts of physicians and researchers and engineers, including a number of researchers at the Indian Institute of Technology. And I don't know that many people appreciate the Indian Institute of Technology. We might think of it like our MIT, but it's actually quite a step above. It's more like the École Polytechnique of France. There are more than 1,000 applicants for each single position there. And it's people at that institution who are advising Dr. Sharma when it comes to some of the electrical engineering issues that he will be talking with you about today. Other advisors I name here, and when I'm presenting to you today, it takes a village. And I'm very pleased that my village includes people whose work I can share with you today. I'm going to talk with you about studies on children, and I want to show you this. You will not believe that there is an infant iPad bouncy chair for infants, okay? There is an iPotty as well, and there is an iPad and iPhone plastic baby teething rattle case. Now, this is contrary to the recommendations of the American Academy of Pediatrics. This is contrary to the recommendations of neuropsychiatrists who worry about the developing brain, not because of the RF radiation that these devices emit, but because of the stimulation of the young brain with electromagnetic signals and also the unknown impact of radiofrequency radiation on developing brain. Children learn through their mouths, infants especially. And we've all seen people who are using these devices as pacifiers for children. This is not a good idea. This is a form of child abuse. I know that the parents who can afford to buy these devices have no idea that they are exposing the developing brain to microwave radiation that has never been evaluated for its impact on the infant brain. It has been assumed to be safe, and there is no electrical engineer that will tell you that this is a good idea. Certainly, it's something that we at Environmental Health Trust are very deeply concerned about. So what do we know about the radiation from the electromagnetic spectrum? I'm going to focus on microwaves and especially pulsed microwaves. Pulsing has been shown to produce more biological effects than the continuous wave signal. And this has been documented by a number of researchers, Carl Blackman, Huber, and others. Now, if you look at the spectrum, it goes all the way from the long radio waves, quite large, to the very, very small ones, the gamma and the X-rays, which we know are ionizing, which we know break ionic bonds. There's no debate about it. They have a lot of energy. They have the power to have this effect. Non-ionizing radiation is all over to the right of the X-rays. Non-ionizing radiation was thought to only have effects when it produced heat. That in fact, was a reasonable assumption perhaps 40 years ago. The work that Dr. Sharma has been doing with many colleagues in India, the work that Environmental Health Trust is doing with many colleagues around the world, including in the United States, clearly shows that currently used cell phones do cause biological effects that are in fact damage. Keep in mind, biological effects and damage aren't the same thing. You know, your body temperature changes naturally when you exercise. But the brain temperature should not be changing because of exposure to cell phone radiation. And that's the way we've set standards, based on avoiding heat. However, what I'm going to show you today, and Dr. Sharma will agree, is that it is the pulsed signal, the signal that goes, that is erratic, that is low, and is too weak to damage DNA directly by breaking bonds, but it does damage DNA, as we will show you. Just to get a visualization of what these waves look like, they're quite complex. So they have frequency, they have power, they have amplitude, and they have information content. And we have to consider, in studies that we do, all of these things. In fact, continuous waves can be therapeutic and have been used in medicine for a long time for that purpose. The pulse signal can also be medically valuable. It's being used now with FDA-approved devices to enhance the uptake of chemotherapy into the brain. Think about what that means for toxic substances. It means that any toxic substance circulating in your body will be more easily absorbed into the body because you've weakened the blood-brain barrier. Just to give you an idea of how much change there is in power density in a short period of time, you see on the y-axis power density, which is volts per meter, and this is what happens in a 4-second phone call. The worst time to put a phone right next to your head is when you're traveling in a car that does not have the car going through the speakerphone, which is safer, and it's not connected to any device. Your head becomes the antenna, and it goes to max power, when you say hello. So answer the phone out here. Right? Put it on speakerphone, use a headset. But look at the amount of variation you get in 4 seconds. And it's this repeated exposure to this over a lifetime that we believe is biologically important. And in the case of sperm, as Dr. Sharma will show you, we see evidence of it having an effect quite early. So the standards for cell phones have not changed in 18 years. We don't need to belabor that. That is a fact. The U.S. General Government Accountability Office urged the FCC to change their standards. The FCC issued a notice of inquiry in 2013, and it has not yet been finalized. They have over 900 documents and thousands of pages and less than one full-time person to review them. Now, this is just a visualization of models that have been developed of the specific absorption rate, which is a measure of the strength of a magnetic field absorbed by the body or brain. The yellow-white is the hottest in this scale. And you see, of course, that children will absorb relatively more proportional to their smaller heads. That's very simple. However, it's not quite a scaling. This was old data, and I'm going to show you some new data. These data were developed for Motorola in 1997 by Om Gandhi, who was then a professor of electrical engineering and president of the Bioelectromagnetic Society. He lost his funding when he produced these studies that showed that children, if you scaled down the child brain from the adult brain, you got greater exposure. Well, we don't just have children as smaller scales of adults. This actually was a good approximation, but it had some flaws because it was scaled. What we've done now, and this is unpublished data, and I want to make sure no one understands, everyone understands this is unpublished data, but it's very important. We have done, and you see the scale with white being the hottest in radiation. That's what that represents. We have modeled now a 6-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 34-year-old. If you look at the 6-year-old, you'll see that the white area, right under the phone, and the yellow-red, the hottest area, goes all the way from the cheek, all the way up into the eye, and all the way down into the top of the spinal column. If you look at the 11-year-old, you see it also still gets into the spinal column, but the area is a little bit less. And by the time you get to the 34-year-old, it doesn't get into the spinal column, and it's not affecting the eye in as hot an area. All right. We are also doing modeling of iPads and modeling of Google Glass. And in all of these, we're finding that levels can be quite hot, much higher in the younger brain. Why is this? The head differences between the adult and the child, there's no difference in exposure to the head. And that's what industry says. They're correct. There is no difference in exposure to the head. But into the brain, which has more fluid and a softer skull, there's clearly a higher exposure. And even if the exposures were identical to the child and the adult, the child is not just a little adult. Their brains are less myelinated, they are growing more rapidly, and they need more protection. That's why we put helmets on them. That's why we put them in special car seats until they reach a certain weight. Children need more protection than adults, and our standards do not take that into account. This is also modeling done. This was published by the Swiss National Institute of Technology, showing the greater absorption into the exposure of the 9-month fetus, and the white hot yellow and red is the highest exposure. That is why we are proud to be participating in the Baby Safe project with Yale University chairman Hugh Taylor, who has done studies that I'm going to show you today about why pregnancy needs to be protected. This is just a cartoon, and I want to point something out here. This is just exposure from a phone. But today, you could add to that person a phone, a laptop, an iPad, a router. And router exposures don't mean anything most of the time, except where they're located and how much power they have. And that is a big factor that is seldom taken into account by the people who cite them, who are working only on how good a signal they can get. This is just to show you how incredibly rapid the baby's brain will grow. At 3 weeks, it's just a cluster of cells on the top of a spindle. That's all it is. At birth, you have a functioning brain. It's quite remarkable. And in the first year of life, that brain doubles in size. Imagine what that exposures to anything means to the infant brain. That's why we protect our children. We know from the studies on lead how important it is in the first 2 years of life. I was a member of the CDC advisory committee that set the standards for lead in 1978. And the premise of that committee deliberation was the need to protect, again, the infant brain, recognizing that exposures that take place in the first 2 years of life can have much more of an effect on the adult than exposures that take place later. So now I'll turn a little bit to the sperm experiments, and this is just a summary of some of the stuff Dr. Sharma will show you. This is showing you that if you take 2 test tubes of sperm from the same person, one test tube gets exposed to cell phone radiation, the other does not. You will see that in the top there, the exposed sperm in the top column die 3 times faster than the unexposed. Exposed to cell phone radiation, computer generated to mimic a cell phone in the National Laboratory of Australia's NIH, where they study these things, Sir John Aitken, who is a Cambridge University trained andrologist. He also showed motility, the ability of sperm to swim, is 3 times worse in the exposed, and DNA damage on the mitochondria of the sperm, which is the engine of the cell, is also almost 4 times greater when measured in the standard laboratory tests that are used to measure these things. Now, I show you this, Dr. Sharma will show you other studies done on sperm, because I want to stress there's a lot of literature here. And think about young boys who are keeping phones in their pocket without any awareness of the fact that this can have a damaging effect. This is what we know from the Cleveland Clinic, from Ashok Agarwal, who is a colleague of Dr. Sharma. This was data they published in 2008. Men who kept the cell phone in their pocket had the lowest sperm count. Studies have been done with Wi-Fi on a laptop, which the laptop was specially engineered so it didn't generate heat, because heat, of course, will kill sperm. We know this. And these laptops were created so they were not creating heat, but they were creating the Wi-Fi signal, normal Wi-Fi signal from the antenna of the laptop. Most people have no idea where the antenna are on their laptops. In fact, nowadays, laptops aren't called laptops anymore. They're called tablets for the most part, because they belong on tables. Most of them are tested at 20 centimeters from an adult male body. Think about all these little children whose arms are not even 20 centimeters long using these iPads. I know that a lot of the audience here isn't technical, but for those who are, I wanted to explain that there are some theories of mechanisms that could be involved. And this was developed, again, with the Cleveland Clinic. And you see at the top either a cell phone or toxic chemicals. Either one can have functional or structural impacts. It can change the structure of DNA on the right, and that cause direct DNA break, so you're damaging the structure of it, or it cannot damage the structure, but it can damage the function. So things like calcium efflux, which is critical to membrane integrity. Calcium efflux can be altered. Stress proteins can be increased. Heat shock proteins can be increased. And all of those can have an effect on sperm metabolism and motility. And of course, the so-called testicular barrier is actually 100 times more sensitive than any other barrier on the human body. So anything that gets on the testis gets into the bloodstream. That's why young men in military who go commando have to be very careful, because they're being exposed to the pesticides that are now impregnated in their clothing. So briefly, I want to show you the Cephalo children study, because there's a lot of discussion about brain cancer. Now, what we know about children from other studies that have been done in other exposures is that children have more sensitivity and can develop a cancer response sometimes shorter than others. So this was the largest study done in the Scandinavian countries where children began to use cell phones. And they found that for kids aged 7 to 19, they reported what I'm showing you here. Regular cell phone use had an increased risk of 1.36, meaning 36% more brain cancer in the children who use cell phones. However, it was not statistically significant because it ranged from 0.92 to 2. But in these 3 nations, what they looked at operator records, and what they were able to find is something rather interesting.
After 2.8 years of cell phone use by these children, there was an increased odds risk of 2.14. However, the authors say that this is not significant. Their conclusion is that our data does not support a causal interpretation. We cannot, however, rule out the possibility that mobile phones confer a small increase in risk and therefore emphasize the importance of future studies. And I would say that's really, really important, because here's the analysis that my intern and I have recently done. If you look at never regular users of children, and you look at they are considered the thing you compare it with. That's your one, okay? You compare their rate of brain cancer with those of people who have had the longest duration of phone calls. And what you see there is what we call a dose-response relationship. The longer children have used calls in hours, the greater their risk of brain cancer. And these numbers, by the way, are highly significant. So I respectfully disagree with the author's conclusion, and I think we already have some evidence of an increase in brain cancer in children. And this is, again, unpublished analyses that we will be submitting for publication. Now, Hardell, who has been one of the most prolific researchers on this issue, has also found that with adolescents, those who begin to use cell phones regularly before age 20 have between 4 to 8 times more brain cancer 10 years later, and the highest risks are with those with the greatest use of 25 plus years. The South Korean government now, like India, has standards for towers that are much stricter than the United States. South Korea and India and Israel are countries that are high-tech, very high-tech, and quite knowledgeable. They design and build the software and the hardware that we use. In South Korea, the government is warning about digital dementia in children. They're talking about a properly developed left hemisphere and an improperly developed right hemisphere, with magnetic resonance imaging confirmation of this dementia in the brain of middle school children who start at age 3 to play on these things. And by the time they are 9 or 10, they have brain damage that is characterized by this term digital dementia. The Korean government in 2012 also reported on what they call smartphone addiction in their youth. And they found that a growth in addiction, and they also reported an increase in the number of people diagnosed with dementia under age 65, a doubling from 2006. Now, even if some of that increase is due to what we call a diagnostic ascertainment, it's really important to find out what's behind it. Now, I will briefly share with you the work of Dr. Taylor, one of the leaders of the Baby Safe Project, which now has more than 100 obstetricians and pediatricians who have signed on. And they are any obstetricians or pediatricians here, we have material to give you to share with your patients. And we're always looking for people to join us. This work showed behavioral impacts of prenatal exposure. The study looked at simulated cell phone exposure, actually right at the water position of the cage. So it wasn't very great exposure, but rodents drink water all the time. The levels of exposure were not very high. It wasn't that they actually had a great deal of difficulty getting the mice to make phone calls. So they put the phone at the water bottle, which is far in terms of exposure, but throughout embryogenesis, which is 3 weeks. And what they found was the behavior of the animals was affected by their prenatal exposure to cell phones. Animals with cell phone radiation exposure had more problems with memory, hyperactivity, and anxiety, and they also had less fear. Dr. Taylor says the animals were bouncing off the walls. Now, the research question remains, is there an effect of prenatal exposure specifically on the hippocampus? The hippocampus is critical to memory and balance. And I will show you just some of the data from this important study from our colleague in Turkey that shows that there is an effect of cell phone radiation simulated with a computer to simulate the exposure. And the findings are these. Prenatally exposed animals have significant damage to their hippocampus. You can see on the left these nice, healthy, round cells. That's what they're supposed to look like. And on the right, you see fewer cells, fewer brain cells, and more irregularities in their membranes. Obviously, this is having an effect on the dentate gyrus, which is quite critical. These data may explain Dr. Taylor's results. This may be what's happening in the mice with the problems of hyperactivity. So the possible mechanisms that might be involved have to do with the fact that younger, faster cells can make more mistakes. Say Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Now say it fast and you have trouble. And that's the same thing with cells as they grow. I want to briefly touch upon the increase in parotid gland tumors in Israel, which have tripled. And because of this, the Israeli Dental Association has warned, since 1 in 5 children, 1 in 5 of their cases is under age 20. 1 in 5 cases of this rare malignancy is under age 20. So they are warning now about the need to take action to reduce exposures of children. This is Dr. Taylor's slide. Women should be advised not to use cell phones near their abdomens. Put it on a speakerphone, even let the calls go over and pick up your voicemail when you want to. Late in pregnancy, the exposures are high. There's no question about it. So we are now participating in the Baby Safe Project, and I have materials for those of you who work in clinics to share with your patients, friends who may be pregnant. We have simple advice. We are not telling you to stop using your phone. We just want you to practice safe technology. And we're always looking for people who can help us get that word out. It's really not a smartphone if it kills brain cells. And people have a right to know. They have a right to know this information, which is why I'm really delighted that we have a chance to talk with you here. And we look forward to working with you and your dean and others as they develop appropriate policies in the institution. We could start with something very simple. People should be informed that they did not want to have an iPad or any device directly on their bodies. That's pretty straightforward. And it wouldn't be a lot. We need to, it's a classic example for public health of the need to educate. It's analogous to where we were with seatbelts and airbags. Seatbelts and airbags ultimately only came about when the government required them. I think that this industry is too smart for that. And I've met recently with people at some companies, and they are developing technologies that can obviate some of these issues. Hardware and software changes, it's not that hard. Now, we are launching a website that I would like to bring to your attention, showthefineprint.org, and that website will have on it all of the warnings that are currently buried in your device. Here's what's happening in other countries. In Belgium, in 2013, they banned the sale of phones to children age 7 and younger, and advertisements as well. Turkey also, by the way, banned this and banned advertisements for children. In Australia, the government's Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency has created a fact sheet that emphasizes the need to protect children. But the French Health Agency in 2012 concluded in a review of all of the data that there is evidence for biological effects both in animals and humans, and including an increased risk for brain tumors. But I stress, biological effects is not a trivial issue. It's things like damage to sperm. And it's a huge issue for young men and especially for young women. Keeping a phone in their pocket means that their ovaries could potentially be affected. And once a girl has only one set of ovaries for her lifetime, so the need to protect them is quite obvious. Cities have also become involved now. These are warnings from the cities that have been developed. We've been involved frankly, in most of them, as a matter of fact. And I was honored to testify before the Berkeley City Council just last month when they unanimously passed the Cell Phone Right to Know Ordinance in May of 2015, the ordinance that is currently being challenged by industry, although I think that they may wish to rethink that challenge. So where are we? We need to have approaches to cell phones that are as low as reasonably achievable. The ALARA approach is recommended by the American College of Radiology for diagnostic radiation. We need diagnostic radiation. A child comes into the emergency room, they need an MRI, they need a CAT scan, which is ionizing radiation. And now the standards are to be as low as possible. You get a really good image with the high radiation, but they really are mandating as low as possible. I think that that is, again, something that we can do. And the tremendous variation we have now in radiation from phones tells you that you can have all of them be much lower than they are today.
It's just an example of the fine print warnings that you can find that are in your device now.
This is what used to be in the iPhone 4. And then, I'm not quite sure of the sequence of things, but here's what happened. In 2010, I published a book called Disconnect, The Truth About Cell Phone Radiation. Commercial message, you can order it on Amazon, and if you do, order the one with the screen cover because that's the one that benefits us. And that book had a chapter called Read the Fine Print and referred to this. Within perhaps a few weeks of its publication, the fine print warnings were gone. They were no longer put into packaging as they were then. They were buried into the phone's operating system. And for those of you who want to know afterwards, I can tell you how you can find them. You can find the warnings. You just don't know that they're there unless someone has told you. So we are now campaigning to make young women aware that cell phones should not be held in the bra, just like manufacturers say. Manufacturers say, don't keep the phone on the body. But people don't know it. They have a right to know it. We're working with some cities and doctors' offices and with the Indian government. The Indian government has given away, at this point, we think, thousands of copies, as has the Finnish government, of our doctors' advice on cell phone safety. So I will stop at this point with the BlackBerry warning, which, by the way, it says, if you have a pacemaker implanted in your chest, it says, do not carry the BlackBerry in your pocket. Okay? So what is your heart? It's your pacemaker, isn't it? Why would anybody want to put a two-way microwave radio right over their heart? So now I would like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Sharma. And while he's coming up, let me just say that I met Dr. Sharma in India, and we were, it was immediately clear to me, that we had a lot of common interests and, frankly, a lot of common experiences. Some of you know I was a Clinton official, and so I'm not unfamiliar with the challenges of working for the government. And it was an honor to serve. It was also easier not to serve in terms of independence of scientific research. And Dr. Sharma has been leading the government for on a number of issues for a number of years, and now has been the coordinator and chief writer of the interministerial report from the Indian government, Interministerial Telecom Health Education. And that report in 2012 led to the lowering of emissions from towers to 90% lower than their current standards, and also advised that children's exposure be reduced. And he has been championing the public health basis for those recommendations for years. So it's a great honor for me to introduce Dr. Sharma to you today.
So for my talk, I'm going to concentrate only on these four aspects. What is the scientific hypothesis, which I generally think before I started my career or my start in this thing? The studies published from the country, and what are the policy decisions and the guidelines which we have developed, and what are the public concern in India. Now, before I go in much detail, because I don't know the audience, maybe some people which are from a different public health background, these 3 points are very, very important, which has to be very clear. What is health? How do we define health? Whether the absence of any disease is really a healthy person or something else. As per the WHO, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So for the biological effects are concerned, the effects are measurable responses to a stimulus or to a changes in the environment and are not necessarily the harmful to our health. That means that if any stimuli which comes to in contact with our body or the surface, then some biological changes are taking place. But the moment you remove it, these changes are reversible. You won't find much changes there. But the health hazard are different. Here is the disconnect between the people that they mix these things. Health hazard means the changes that are irreversible and stress the system for a long period of time. So these 3 points are very, very important. And these things raise the questions which are always in my mind, whether what are these biological effects? What are these biological effects? Then comes, can we ignore these biological effects if they exist? And then, if not, then what measure we should take? What advisory we should issue as a government policymaker to my people that what is going on? So these are the 3 main issues which I'm trying to cover under this study. Now, these are some factors, because I have reviewed almost all the literature available, particularly on this topic. And I noticed that there are a number of studies have been criticized by various authors also, by various agencies also. But one of the main important things which I noticed, why the data differ from one study to another study, from one continent to another continent, because of these factors. But this is a very important parameters. Means what? These are radio frequency radiations. Their impact is basically influenced by various environmental factors as well as the biological factor. Environmental factor means the ambient temperature. We are sitting in this room. What is the temperature of this room? That is going to impact my biological effect of these radiation. The air velocity, the humidity, and the electrical properties of the environment, the altitude, the geopathic radiation, which is, I think, the earth radiations, the waves are always there. If the people are sitting on that, there are some studies which have reported that those people who resides in geopathic waves, the incidence of cancer in these families are more. So it means that you cannot ignore these geopathic radiation when you are conducting such type of study. They are also playing a very important role. Various biological factors like mass, shape, size of the body, the orientation of the body, the electric property of the body, each person vary from another one. Individual variations are well known, well established. The electric property, the age, gender, even the muscles contents and the bone mineral densities are also different, because that clearly indicate that whatever data generated in America or European country may not be true, that or may be having the same impact on my population, the Indian population, because the bone mineral density, the muscular mass, they are totally different. So there are differences between the races. So these factors has to be considered when we are conducting such type of studies. Now, so for the scientific hypothesis is concerned regarding this, I believe that, and everybody knows about that, every living and non-living things consist of a variety of atoms. Atom consists electrons, protons, neutrons, etc. And every living and non-living things is in a state of vibrational harmonic resonance. And if it's so, then every system, every organ, tissue, cells, and molecules of the human body vibrates within a certain range of frequency. This is the main things which I believe in this hypothesis. And now we know that there are. So for the whole world is divided, particularly the RFR radiations are concerned, whether their effect is because of the thermal effect or because of the non-thermal effect. The ICNIRP guidelines says that whatever effect is there, that is because of the thermal effect. But the biological effect, the thermal effect, that is also there, which we have to define. And how? When any high energy is there, and is reached to a molecule, then there is a vibration of these molecules increases. And this vibration is increased up to that extent that increase in the temperature, which we can measure, and that increase in temperature certainly result to the adverse health effect. And we call it, this is a thermal effect. This impact is because of the thermal effect. But when the energy is so low, that Dr. Davis showed one of the slide, when the spectrum of the light is there, the non-ionizing radiations energy is low compared to ionizing radiations. So this is the issue. The non-ionizing radiations which we are facing in the environment, they are low energy molecules, having low energy. When it come in contact with the body, then the molecules in the body vibrate. But that energy is not sufficient to increase this vibration up to the extent that the increase in the temperature is measurable. That's not there. But the report says that constant periodical exposure of low EMF influence biological oscillation, and which play an important role in biological regulatory pathway. And the alteration in biological regulatory pathway have got the biological effect. And this is the low energy absorbed at molecular level manifests changes in vibration of the molecules, producing various molecular transformation and alteration. And that is because of the thermal effect, which we are understanding. Now, this is which when I came to know that once the Albert Einstein he reported a syndrome called the colony disrupting syndrome or colony collapse syndrome. And that is nothing but he said that if the bees disappear from the surface of the globe, then the man would only have 4 years of life left. What do you mean by that? That no more bees, no more pollination, no more plants, no more animals, and no more men. That was quite interesting and important for me. Then I asked my 2 scientists in my country in Department of Ministry of Environment, asked to do some studies on this part. But before that, when I developed some interest to see what is this honey. Though the colony destruction syndrome, one of the main reason is not because of this pollution, but their pesticide and other factors are also there. But I wanted to know what is this, basically these honeybees have got the link with this radiofrequency radiation. I noticed that Carl von Fries, he's a German scientist, got a Nobel Prize in 1973 in decoding the language of the honeybees. There are honeybees in their hives. They are having 3 types of dances: the waggle dance, the shaking dance, and tremble dance. And by doing these dances, they generate some frequencies. And based on these frequencies, the workers who are in the field, they are connected. And they identify these frequencies and they get the message where to go, where the nectar is there, whether they have to stop the nectaring and they have to come back to their hives, what to do. All this is basically based on these frequencies. And these frequencies are generated by the honeybees in the hives by doing these 3 dances. That was quite exciting to me that there is something which is equal to the cell phone industry is doing, the nature is already doing some there. Now, I mentioned, I asked some people to really work on this and whether these are playing some role. Then one experiment was conducted by one of the scientists, Nilima, that they took the worker, the 10 worker in the control group and the 10 worker in the cell phone exposed group. They exposed to these cell phone radiations. And they exposed to the 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes in both the groups. And then we took out the hemolymph from the abdomen. And they measure the levels of the carbohydrate, glycogen, glucose. And they noticed that when they expose these honeybees to 10 to 20 minutes, the levels are very, very high. But when it is 40 minutes duration, the level goes down. And not only this, it reduces the motor activities and en masse migrates. And we know that generally honeybee migrates in the group. But because of these radiation, they start migrating independently because of the stress. During initial wet period, rise in concentration of these biomolecules due to stimulations of the body mechanism to fight stressful condition. And at ultra stage, there was a decline in the concentration of biomolecules because of the body had adapted these stimulation. So the biological changes were established by this study also. So for the honeybees is concerned. Then there was another scientist who took hives. That's what the individual honeybees were there, but here who used the hives, 3 hives in the non-cell exposure group and 3 hives when they exposed these cell phone radiation for 5 to 10 days. And we know that in the hives, they are twins, they are workers, their laborers are there. There are different type of division of labor is there in the honeybees. And we noticed that after few days, only the worker never returned to their hives. Because whatever I mentioned during this dancing mechanism, they are not able to really do it, or they are not able to recognize these frequencies from their hives there, and therefore they are not able to come back to their hives. And hence, the thriving hives left with only queens, eggs, and having wound immature worker bees. And this is the thing which the Einstein described the colony disrupting syndrome. I'm not saying that this is the only hive, but certainly it has got some link. Now, so for the other studies, this is totally a different thing, which made my hypothesis more stronger that yes, there are some biological impact of these radiations are there. Then what Indian scientists did? Because in India, my concern as a soldier of to protect the health of my people, that we are having 9 million pupils who are using cell phone. We are having almost 0.54 million mega cell phone towers in the country. The socio-economic status in my majority of the population is totally different. So health is, if my people are not healthy, we are not able to do the good job. So that is very, very important. So we directed, even the Prime Minister of the country directed my ministry as well as the Department of Science and Technology to do the research in this area, because this is a very sensitive area. So there are a number of studies that were conducted in my country, and which whatever I'm going to present here, they are all published data. There are some studies which I am directly involved. I'm not going to talk much about that study. This is there are three parts. The first is the genetic alteration. There are studies which reported the genetic alteration are there. The Gandhi, the cytogenetic damage in mobile phone. There are 25 subjects were enrolled in this study. There are cell phone users. What are the SAR values were noticed? How many times the duration of talk is there, and one of the important things, the micronutrient percentage increase in compared to control. In addition to that, the aberration in metaphase was also increased. You look at the control slide here. The micronutrient concentration is 0.06 or 0.0 something like that. But in the previous slide, if you will go back, you will find this percentage is increasing. Same as with the aberration in the metaphase also. Here also is 14 or 10 or something like that. So in comparison to the control, because this study was conducted in these and few more in I think 2005. So at that time we were having the control subject. Today it is very difficult to get this control subject, those people who are not using cell phone. Even in my current study, which I am conducting, the Cohort study, it is very difficult for me to find any person in India even who are not using cell phone. Now, this is another study by the same group, and this is very complicated, but Dr. Davis summarized it very nicely, that the range of cytogenetic damages in non-user compared to heavy users is like that. In the control, is almost 0.212, but in the exposed group, it's very, very high. So this range is very highly significant in comparing to control, so what the genetic damage is concerned. Look at this slide. The genetic non-users and this, again, it is very, very, so far the MN test is concerned and the other parameters of this study. So that clearly established this study conducted in 2000, reported in 2005, the genetic damage in Indian human population. This is also a study which was conducted on similar parameters, but in animal model, that is the rat. And the effect of 3G cell phone exposed with the compared to the control. You look at the first table 2. In comparison to control, the DNA damage is almost twice to the in the exposed group, and the multinucleated cell percentage also in buccal cell, that is also quite high. Lymphocyte, peripheral lymphocytes also, and then the chromosomal aberration also. In both these slides, they clearly indicate the genetic damage of the peripheral lymphocytes and the buccal epithelial cells in the mobile telephone user increases significantly as compared with the control. So this is also showed like that. This is another study conducted in the mice, which also indicated the increase in erythrocytes and the leukocyte counts, because we noticed the erythrocyte counts had increased, a significant DNA stent breakage but noticed. And this is the also first report which provided experimental evidence that the continuous exposure to the low intensity microwave radiation may have an adverse effect on the brain function by altering the circadian system and rate of DNA damage, because this author conducted some behavioral study also, and based on that they concluded this. Now, the effect of 3G cell phone on heat shock protein. Heat shock protein, I think everybody understands, which is very, very important. So for this subject is concerned. And this is a study conducted on male rat, where they exposed these rats to 2 hours per day for 60 days. And they noticed that so far the weight of the testes is concerned compared to the control in exposed group, compared to the control. This is the oxygen species. This increased significantly. Look at the next slide. So for the committed acid parameter is concerned, in compared to control, the exposed group, the assay is very, very high.
Can we just have a light down for a minute?
Yeah. Then you can see the exposed group.
We have down in the front.
I got it.
What we're talking about here
Yeah.
is the tail of the comet, and you can see in the exposed, there's a much longer tail.
In
And then
compar-
you look at the data on the right,
Right.
and it gives you the measurement of the length of the tail, and you can see that in the exposed versus the sham exposed and the cage control, there's a significant
Increase.
in damage.
Yeah, damage.
to the DNA.
So here also this is quite a big evidence indicating that genetic alteration is there. Now this is the microgenetic polychromatic cells assay. So now the MNPCE in the exposed group you'll see in compared to the cage control and the sham one, I think there's a very, very evident, very, very clear. This is again we did the other parameters, the NCE and the PCE parameters, and in this slide clearly indicate the case control said in the exposed group they are quite suppressed. That is there. Now this is the comparison of caspase activity. In exposed group, caspase activity is increasing very, very high. It's highly significant in comparative to the case control that they share in exposed group. So the author concluded that data indicated that the radiation emitted from these significantly induced the DNA strand breakage in the brain, increase in phosphorylation, and all these parameters. And the study shows that the oxidative stress is the main factor which activates a variety of cellular signal transduction pathway. And results concluded that 3G mobile phone radiation affect the brain function and cause several neurological disorders. This is an animal-based study. Now, this is another the study which is based on the reproductive, what is the reproductive health. So, what the reproduction is concerned of these the animals are concerned. So, this is a study where they again expose the rats to the 2 hours per day for 35 days, and they notice that you look at that top slide, there's the exposed one, and then bottom one is the control one. The sperm count is decreased, and apoptosis in an exposed group is increased. It means the sperm count is decreased because the apoptosis is increased. And therefore, it's quite dangerous for the other sperms are concerned. The chronic exposure to the radiofrequency radiation emitted from cell phone causes a significant decrease in protein kinase C as well as the total sperm count along with the increased apoptosis in male rat. This is the mobile phone electronic waves study. Particularly, this is an in vitro study where the semen samples collected from healthy human volunteers, 20 healthy volunteers, and this, along with these samples, around for 2.5 centimeters away from the sample, the cell phone were kept. And then the author saw what is going on in these semen samples. You see this, the viability. The pre-exposed gets to 51, whereas the post-exposed comes down to 47. The motility is also, so the motility, certainly the sperm count is not going to, because this is an in vitro system, the sperm count is not influenced, but so far the viability and the motility is concerned, that is adversely influenced when we are exposing the in vitro, these spermatozoa from this radiation. That clearly indicates that this is not only because of the thermal effect, but these radiation are also influencing at the level of the mitochondria, because we know the mitochondria is the main powerhouse of the sperms to have the motility part. So the this study indicated that concluded that the mobile phone emit electromagnetic waves which lead to oxidative stress in human semen and also cause changes in DNA fragmentation. Now, the therapeutic, we know the melatonin is one of the very important antioxidant, and one of the scientists who did this study by using the melatonin as a therapeutic purpose, also the therapeutic use. The oxidative stress mediated toxicity on the male fertility pattern of the rat, where they use in each group, there are four groups here, the sham exposed group, the melatonin treated group, and the only EMF exposed group, and the melatonin and EMF exposed group. And you will find that the various, look at the first graph, where the weight of the testes is, particularly in the case of the only exposed group, is significantly reduced in compared to the melanin treated or melanin plus exposed group. It means that is influencing. The concentration of the, other parameters like here, this is also there. The genethine oxidase level, they all are ROS levels, and these parameters clearly indicate that this radiation adversely interfering the ROS levels and playing a very dangerous role so far our reproductive system is concerned. Now, this is the impact of the melatonin and melanoidase level. Melatonin and exposed level is very, very high in compared to the melatonin treated group, as that first slide. This is again a comic essay where you can see the DNA strand breaks, but because we are not able to see here, but in microwave, this exposed group, this is very, very high in compared to the melanin and the same exposed group. And this is same study which figure where the tail length, the tail movement, and the tail migration has been shown in all these group. In the exposed group, the tail length is very, very high. In comparative to even the tail movement and tail migration, all parameters in exposed group compared to the shame and the melatonin treated is very, very well established here. Now, again, this is other various parameters, melanoid, I think melatonin. So finally, this paper concluded that the melatonin prevent oxidative damage biochemically by significant increase in testicular other parameters. Melatonin reverse the effect of the microwaves, and the melatonin has a strong antioxidant potential against microwave-induced oxidative stress-mediated DNA damage. So this is also estimated that, yes, against this radiation, melatonin play a therapeutic role. That is also there. This is another study, again on the animal model, where the animals, the testes were both in exposed and control group. You can see here the testicular architect of the testes is disturbed in exposed group in compared to the control. Left side is the control group, and look at this side. All the spermatogonias and the spermatids, they have come in the center. It detached the whole, even the seminiferous tubal diameter has decreased. So this clearly indicates when in the previous study we noticed the testicular bait is going down. The testicular bait is going down, the seminiferous tubule has decreased. The whole architect of the testes seminiferous tubule rather, has decreased in this study. Now, this indicates that the effect of microwave radiation on the sperm count and the sperm viability. In control group, you'll see the sperm count in compared to exposed this sperm count. Again, it decreased. So this study also indicates that this radiation adversely influences so far the reproduction or the fertility of the animal is concerned. Now, so far other biomarkers are concerned, there are a group of scientists who are working in this area, and they study the pathophysiology of microwave radiation effect on and rat brain. And they notice, you look at this slide here, the melatonin, the creatine kinase, and the caspase, and the calcium ion concentration, which are all biological markers, and then compared to the same group and the exposed group, the all differences are very, very significant. So, again, the author concluded here, the alteration in expression of these biomarkers clearly indicate possible health implication of such exposure. My hypothesis, I'm trying to correlate whatever I said in the beginning, that all these biological markers are playing a role. But when you remove this, when you are away from this, certainly it will become normal. But the question remains again unanswered, that how long a man has to face these biological alteration and how much time it will take to really convert into health hazard. That is the question which we need to answer, find the answer, which will certainly take a long time to go. Now, this is again a biochemical change in rat and brain expand to low intensity, and this study reveals that the chronic exposure of the rat microbe altered the activity of the certain enzymes, particularly the ornithine decarboxylase, and also the significant decrease in the protein kinase C. Now, this is again the heat shock protein in human subject, where the author used the frequently, one group who were using the frequent cell phone, frequent cell phone user, and other group, they are not, though they are using the cell phone, but not as frequently as the first group is using. And they are the first one, but the IT employees, they are using hours together for their professional activities, the cell phones. And they notice a very important finding here. I can summarize here. This is the distribution of how this is. And this, look at, so for the duration of their talks, they had other parameters, sleep, air, all parameters were considered here. And then they concluded here that the serum concentration of the heat shock protein, particularly 70, and the CRP were measured, and the highly significant higher concentration of serum and they were observed in frequent cell phone user in compared to infrequent frequent user. And they also found a higher level of heat shock protein gene expression in frequently used cell phone users in compared to non-frequent use cell phone use. Thus, the study convincingly demonstrated the role of serum HSP and CRP as a systematic inflammatory biomarker for mobile phone-induced radiations. The prevalence of this is a study, though there are 2-3 studies conducted in India, so hearing capabilities, audiometry is concerned, because a group of scientists is working in this area also. Though I have just included one slide here where they explore a possible relationship between the prolonged mobile phone use and this sensory neural deafness in healthy volunteer in rural India. And they found it very clear. So for the other parameter, the tinnitus and background and other parameters concerned, but the relationship between the average daily use and the severity of the deafness was noticed. Here, this side is the duration. As the duration increases, this loss is there. So it is increasing. So that clearly indicates, though author clearly didn't establish that whether this is only because of that, but this clearly says it is not clearly known whether the mobile phone use is the direct cause of the deafness in these subjects, but the absence of other causes might point toward its etiological role. And there are certainly, we need to investigate more or conduct more study in this area, and a group of scientists are already working in this area. Now, this is another, because all these biological studies, because in my country also, the people say that, okay, these are going on, these animal studies are there. As we know that even the World Health, or because as a member of the International Advisory Committee of the WHO, the WHO and reported these radiation as to be carcinogen, possible carcinogen. So they may be the possible carcinogen, but until unless we conduct a very comprehensive cohort study, long-term cohort study, we won't be able to, and we monitor all these parameters, we won't be really able to establish, yes, these radiation cause damage to or health hazard. And so I have already I got the money from the government. India government is supporting this study, where under this study we are trying to establish a very big cohort of around 4,500 people who are using cell phone in different category, means the heavy cell phone user, the moderate cell phone user, and those people who are using very, very less, means half an hour in a day, because you won't find people who are not at all using cell phone. So that is very difficult. So we are measuring their reproductive dysfunction, the neurological disorder, particularly in case of the cognitive behavior, the cardiovascular disorder, the NT disorder, the carcinogenicity pattern, then other hematological, biochemical, and hormonal parameter. In addition to that, we are also measuring what type of cell phone you are using, what are their characteristics, what are their SAR value, where they are residing, whether they are nearby their cell phone towers are there, whether their emission is as per the government recommendation. All these parameters have been considered in this study. And as I mentioned in the beginning, to reconfirm whatever this published data is there, one of another department, the Department of Science and Technology, where I am also the member of that committee, we have started on similar line 17 new proposals to reconfirm whatever the people have already reported. So we are we are going on in this type. Now, so far the guidelines is concerned, Government of India constituted a committee in 2010, where I was the member of this committee. This is a response to and I prepare, being a person from the Ministry of Health. There are my colleague from Department of Biochemistry, Science and Technology, and my colleague from Ministry of Environment, because this is a guidelines developed by the whole country. So and then the people from Ministry of Communication and IT. And we prepared this report and in 2000 submitted to the government 2011. And though the government accepted few certain parts of this recommendation, where we adopted the SAR value as whatever in the US, the FCC guidelines as per the 1.6 watts per kg. But so far the other parameters which we also highlighted to bring awareness about the manufactured mobile phone, all these parameters, but these parameters have been introduced in the country and the government has agreed. So for the cell phone tower is concerned, the mobile base station is concerned, because in my country, the base station generally being used, they are macro cell phone tower and mushrooming in the whole city. So you can find big cell phone. I will show the picture of that. So that was major concern to the public too also. So we were, before 2010 to 2012, we were following the CNUF's guideline where the levels were 9.2 watts per square meter. And our committee recommended that we have to bring down to 1/10. So currently we are following our the exposure limit. The power density is 0.92 watts per square meter. So we have reduced our radiation levels. So for the cell phone towers is concerned. There are other recommendation also. The government has not yet followed, because we should not have these cell phone towers and in the schools and the hospitals also. But there are still debate is concerned. Now, so far the main public concern in my country is that these are the cell phone towers which are mushrooming in the city. These are macro cell phone tower, and one of the most important thing which we are facing, that we are sharing the antennas. So the levels of the radiations are very high. That is a great concern to me and to my people. And I'm putting pressure, collecting all this data to put to the industry that this is wrong. We have to separate it. We have to remove the macro cell phone tower from the city and go out and put the micro or pico or femto cell phone tower which are being used in other part of the world. Look, these are these cell phones which are being used, they're mushrooming like anything. One of the important concerns because look at this, one of these antenna. In front of that, there is our building. And we noticed this was in newspaper, and there are a lot of problems both in the print media and electronic media. The 6 cancer cases were reported on 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 10th floor only, not on the top and not on the bottom. And there was a great concern raised by that. And because of that, immediately the government has to find out and release my guidelines, which will be submitted in 2010. So these are, but one important thing which I noticed in my country, and when I collected the literature, there is a disconnect between the engineers, the industry, the public, and the biomedical scientists. And why it is so? Because of this publication which I found in 2006. Industry-funded research, 71% published data indicate there is no effect. Where the public-funded, the 63% studies say there is impact. So the whole world is divided. Therefore, I always in my country see that any study which is, I'm sorry to use this word, any study in my country which is funded by private agency, I am not going to accept it. The study has to be, I told to my government that if we want to answer or find the solution for this problem, we have to fund it. And therefore, I think the whole world is, because if you go to the industry show number of data, a list of data where there's no effect. So this is the main problem which I noticed. So in the end, I conclude that the authorities should accept the fact that the RFR emitted from cell phone and cell phone tower has got a biological effect, and need to conduct comprehensive multidisciplinary prospective long-term cohort study in different population in different countries. And based on these results, each country should develop health-based precautionary guidelines to protect their population. But till these results are available, authorities should issue appropriate advisory for people so that the people can be saved from adverse health effects of these radiation, if any. Thank you very much for patient care.
Dr. Davis, on the iPad, impact of an iPad with Wi-Fi only versus Wi-Fi and 3G, any differences?
Well, obviously, if you have Wi-Fi and 3G, you're going to have more exposure. If you have Wi-Fi and you know where your antenna are, right, and you put it on a table, then you're going to have the least exposure. Right? Ed, do you want to add anything for information? Nope. Okay. Thank you. Right. I would encourage you all to look at showthefineprint.org, and there you will find the advice about how to use the iPad safely. Among other things, it says it can trigger seizures. So if you have one, you're supposed to stop using it. Now, the developing brain of a child, of course, is especially sensitive to such things.
And then for Dr. Sharma, you, on one of the slides, you talked about low EMF influences. Define low EMF influences versus we're concerned, I work for IFCheck, we're concerned about a third-party worker working in front of a tower.
Mm-hmm.
So
Occupational versus.
yeah. So what's the when I see these
You can speak here.
impacts,
Your phone.
Yeah.
how are they different for that third-party worker standing in front of that antenna, with 100, 150, 200 watts coming out?
Yeah, this is because in our study we have not used the occupational, these people who are working with these antennas, because whatever it has been reported, they are only the cell phone users or the animal studies where we expose the same radiation. But certainly the effect will be very, very high in compared to the normal ones, whatever we are using. So for the occupational people are concerned.
Yeah, we are very, very concerned at Environmental Health Trust with the lack of labeling
Yeah.
around towers.
Yeah.
And the fact that young men and young people might decide to climb them because it might, with no awareness. Now, the requirements of the FCC, the requirement is there's supposed to be a fence. And is there anything else I should add, Ed, about what was required from towers for labeling for workers? If they work on a tower, it's supposed to be turned off.
Yeah.
The antennas are supposed to be turned off. But we have instances, as you know very well, where that is not done. So this is another problem. One of the biggest problems here is that the FCC does not have the staff or the money to enforce its own laws. It does not. And I think that's only going to change when the public gets involved and says, we want monitoring. You have a right to know, and there should be routine monitoring for these things. And it should not be your job to do the monitoring. So let's let somebody else ask questions too. I know you have a lot to ask, but we'll have a moment to chat afterwards. Thank you, and thanks for what you're doing.
Hi, I'm Desiree Jaworski. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Safer Wireless. And I know when you're discussing about the studies that show there's biological impact from cell phones, do you ever look into the portable phones that everyone uses in their homes, like the DECT phones?
Which
There's
one?
no mention of studies about that. But,
Yes.
that's a major concern.
Your question is about the cordless phones.
Oh.
The cordless phones. Now, in Switzerland, cordless phones can only be sold if they work when you're calling or when someone's calling you. Otherwise, they're on standby mode, asleep. That is the safest and only way that I know to use such things. But cordless phones, as you know, are small base stations in your home. We actually recommend landlines and wired versus wireless whenever possible. And the reason you want wired, there's 3 reasons. First of all, in an emergency, your Wi-Fi will not work, but your corded landline can work. That's number 1, for personal security. Number 2, it also reduces your exposures immediately when you're calling. And number 3, it reduces the exposures in your family. If you have a cordless phone, it's a lot of people do. The charging station is right by the head of your bed. That's a very, very bad idea. The Israeli government advises not to use these phones as well. And I believe that was in your report also.
Yeah.
Would you mind explaining?
Good, yeah. Because cordless, certainly there are some reports also which clearly indicate that there are impacts that there.
Yes, Hardell has done.
Yeah, Hardell studies and other also they have reported. Right. So it's try to avoid the cordless also. So that's because they are acting as an antenna within your house.
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you came up with the recommendations originally probably in 2010, and they got published in 2011 or 12 finally. And the response, what has been the response both from the industry, and what does the ministry plan to do for public education, given the serious problems that India faces now with air and water pollution?
You see, as in other part of the world, everywhere there is some politics is there. Though my government also took like little time from 2010 to 2012 because of various reasons. But finally, because in my country, these NGOs are playing a very important role because they are creating a lot of awareness to the people. And we have also recommended that each cell phone, with each set, there has to be an advisory that what type of adverse effect they are having. What is their SAR value that has to be clearly indicated. When a buyer is going to a market, a shop, and he should know that what type of cell phone he is going to purchase and what is their SAR value. So, and other parameters also we have advised to the government, and now I understand that the people have started following that also, that you minimize the use of cell phone, use hand-free, use text message, and keep your cell phone away from your body. And don't allow your children to play with this. This is not a toy. This is a device. All these issues which we have recommended to the government to issue an advisory to the people. So that is being taken care of.
I'm just putting up here the recommendations because I think this was something that we didn't get a chance to see as much, and it's quite important for us to realize that these are the official recommendations of the Indian government. Yeah. And so my question to you is, are the phones in fact having the information embossed on them?
Nowadays.
Now it is embossed. Yeah. And the towers
But there are some, in the market you will find the old models, still the people are selling them. But if a new model is coming, the SAR value has to be there.
All right, and then I just want you to see, these are the recommendations here in purple, especially.
Yeah, purple,
right?
Yeah.
So, the industry here has said that the SAR value doesn't mean anything, and really, so why do you think SAR is important?
No, SAR very, very important because that is the thing, what is SAR? The specific absorption rate. The rate by which your body is absorbing this radiation, that is directly proportional to the biological effect which our body is going to face it. So if SAR is, if the industry says SAR doesn't have any impact, I don't understand that how they are advocating for that.
Well, they're saying that if you have a phone with a low SAR, and you use it in an area with a poor signal, you're going to get much higher exposure. Yeah, so which we know is true. And you have a phone with a high SAR and you use it in a region with good signal, you're going to get less exposure. And they say, therefore, the SAR doesn't really matter. So, for example, the iPhone has an SAR of 1.59 watts per kilogram. Now, with the plus or minus 30% that is allowed on the SAR, that means that the iPhone can actually go up to 2 watts per kilogram, which exceeds, of course, the recommendation. Now, I don't understand that. I'd like to introduce somebody else here who knows an awful lot about this issue, and that's Dr. George Carlo. Dr. Carlo, would you mind to join our this question of the SAR? Yeah. Dr. Carlo was the director of the WTR, and I will introduce you here, right? And have a seat. I'll stand over there for a second. And he has played a major role in writing a book in 1990. What was your book?
2001.
2001. What was the title?
Cell phones, invisible hazards in the wireless age.
Right. So at that point, he wrote a book in 2001 warning that there were hazards that were not being addressed. And maybe you could give us a brief summary of what you said then and comment on Dr. Sharma's presentation. I invite you.
Okay, well, first, in terms of both presentations, very brilliant and very correct, which is important because in this issue, many times the science is misrepresented for political purposes, and there was none of that here. It's excellent. Yeah. In terms of the work that we did in the 1990s, the WTR was a program put in place after a lawsuit was brought in 1992 And claims were made by the industry that there were thousands of studies that proved that cell phones were safe, when in fact there had been no pre-market testing of cell phones. There were some congressional hearings, and the industry stepped forward and spent what became a $28.5 million research program, which I oversaw. The money was provided by the industry, and there was an interagency working group that oversaw how the studies were done. So we ran that program for 7 years. Originally, it was supposed to be for 5 years. And when we found the results that digital cell phones could interfere with implanted cardiac pacemakers, the industry promptly stopped the funding. And it took about a year for the funding to be reinitiated. We had some very public disagreements. And when the funding was established, I had agreed to step down from running the program because the industry felt that I was not friendly enough to them. But the interagency working group said, no, we need this guy to finish it. So that's how we ended up finishing the program in 1999. The findings, very similar to what you talked about here. We finished that work in 1999, 2000. It means that over the past 15 years, we've really made very little progress in terms of protecting public health in the United States. And we've made a lot of progress in terms of the science, in terms of understanding the underlying mechanisms and those types of things. What's astonishing, just watching the presentations here, is that for any other exposure, any other consumer device, if there was this much science, it would never have made it to the marketplace. Could never have been there.
Yeah.
And now we have this confluence of science and politics that makes this industry sort of too big to fail. So we're in a jam here. And I think that a couple of comments on the science. So many people are using cell phones now and mobile phones and iPads and all of those things that the no exposure control group doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
So what we have to do is figure out ways of parsing through electromagnetic field exposure, EMR exposures, so that we can base gradations in exposure on biological activity. And as Dr. Davis pointed out, continuous waves are not that biologically active. If you look at AM and FM signals, and of course we didn't do this back in the 40s and 50s, but my guess is that back then there were effects that were very similar to what we're seeing now, and over time the population adapted to those continuous wave signals. Now we have modulation overlays, pulsed signals. And what we're finding in going through the data, it's that when you put information on top of the signal, on top of the carrier wave, you have the most biological activity. So if we go back through the data and we're able to parse out where information or voice is on those signals, especially in the animal studies, I think we're going to get more precision in terms of risk. We in the work that we do, we talk about information carrying radio waves as the most biologically active. And the reason that the biological activity is so accelerated with information is because, for example, voice changes. So that voice overlay modulation is very difficult for a cell to get used to and recognize. And it is the surprise to the tubulin on cell membranes which triggers the biological cascades. So that when you have voice on top of the signal, you have more biological activity. So as we go forward, I think from a scientific point of view, we need to figure out ways of not treating all electromagnetic radiation as being the same. We have to figure out how to come up with these gradations, and I think the information carrying radio waves is one way. I just had one point I wanted to make about the state of public policy with regard to this. And, these devices are only required to be tested pre-market on the bench. And then a prototype can be approved, and then whether it's a cell phone or an iPad or any other device, it can go out into commerce. And this is unlike anything we do with any other consumer device. This is a consumer device that releases radiation. It's a consumer device that has potential public health impact. We treat everything else that has these characteristics differently. Like drugs, like pesticides, like contaminants in water. There's pre-market testing, then there's post-market surveillance. Yeah. There are registries to take into account adverse reactions that weren't anticipated, like a safety net. And those are the things that are missing from a public policy point of view. The science is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. We really are, as we go forward with science, we're fine-tuning something we already know, which is good. It's important. But there's such a disconnect, borrowing from the title of your book, between the science and public policy. And that's the bridge, as you pointed out on the slide. So as we look at this, it's really, you know, as you mentioned about the SAR. Now, we know that the SAR is the compliance standard. But we also know with some very good apps now that are available that virtually every phone violates the SAR during real use. And it doesn't just violate it by 20 or 30%. We have real-time SAR measurements with an app called the Quanta that we have developed of SARs going up to 7 or 8 watts per kilogram in real-time use. So it isn't like we're talking about something on the edges. And when you get up into double-digit SAR, you're in heating range. You know.
George, on that point, as you know, it's the peak SAR that is measured over a period of 6 minutes or 30 minutes, right? So because therefore you would expect it to go up a bit. This is an average over 6 minutes or 30 minutes. So what you're saying is that the measurement for any one time can exceed it, you know, dramatically. Sure. I know you had some findings in the studies that you directed that were quite similar to these findings. And I think that's quite important for everybody to realize. What we're showing you today is not new. And it's really important that each one of you leave this meeting today and each one of you reach 10 more people and work with Desiree and Theodora and others that are trying to provide real important information to the public here. We're not making this up. And we don't have any other children to experiment on. We are conducting an experiment on ourselves and our children. And it makes sense to keep the exposures as low as possible. Now, I may differ from my colleagues in that I will tell you that I believe that wireless has revolutionized our lives in a lot of really important and positive ways. We can respond to emergencies in ways that we never could before. In times of great dismay as a parent of a teenager, you can try to reach them. That wasn't possible before. At the same time, there is no question that wireless is disrupting some of the most intimate and important parts of life, including parenting of young children. There are studies now of parents pushing the stroller with like this on the phone, and those children have speech delays. You need to talk to babies and toddlers, and the failure to talk to them and putting them in front of those screens, there is no data suggesting that it's safe or that it's good for the developing brain. So our job is we have to do the science. Your job is to work with your colleagues, if you're scientists, to join us in this research. Why shouldn't the United States be doing the same study that Dr. Sharma is doing in India? We have a very specific proposal we need to support, and it is the following. We've called it, would you give 2 cents? And what it is that we want a 2 cents a device fee, 2 cents a month from the consumer, from the provider, from the manufacturer, in order to fund for 8 years what would turn out to be a $1 billion research project that would train, number one, train people in biomedical engineering, which we don't have train people in medicine and engineering. Number 2, create the research that needs to be done because we have important data gaps. And number 3, create exactly what Dr. Carlos said, a surveillance program that would fund the FCC and the FDA to collect information about adverse effects. And finally, provide for innovations in software and in public education. This is a 5-part program that we would love to have. It can only happen if there is support and demand for it now. So I think at that thought, I will close this. Theodora, do you have something else?
I just briefly wanted to say one of my concerns is wireless in schools, and I just had a question about the as low as reasonably possible, because a typical middle school or high school class will have wireless router. There's a bring your own device, so everyone has cell phones. In fact, I heard they send their math problems when middle schooler told me you send the problem through the cell phone. The kids use their cell phones in class. This was a specific class. And then also the laptops that they have. And I wonder how as low as reasonably possible can apply, because this is happening all over the country.
In terms of the Wi-Fi in schools and multiple devices and the kids having iPads and all of that, there's the medical term for that is effing crazy. Okay, and there is no room in our schools for that. And I think that for the reasons that we have talked about here, the developing brain, brain cells are differentiating in those young kids more than they're proliferating. There is just no way that we should be doing that to our kids. We can plug it in and it's fine. So that's one place where I think we have to draw the line. As Dr. Davis has pointed out, look, life is different because of mobile technology. People run entire businesses from their cell phones and all that stuff. A lot of positive things have come. So we have to figure out how to use this technology safely and all of that. That's all fine. But the experiment with the kids is not right.
I keep hearing that the United States will never move forward with this type of research because of the military use of all of the wireless communications, and that it's going to take like a mountain worth of people to move them to do this. Do you feel that that's true, that the military aspect of this is really hindering any progress in the United States towards limiting?
Right. And in the military, one of our colleagues who's no longer with us, Dr. Ted Litovitz, actually developed a protection, a noise field technology with money from the military. And, depending on what level of classification you're able to sort through, during Operation Desert Shield in the early 90s, there was noise field pumped into the helmets of soldiers in certain areas to protect them because there was concern about biological weapons, anthrax in the heads of Scud missiles, so that our military tried to protect those soldiers because the command and control in the case of a biological weapon attack is not like, okay, everybody line up and let's get out of here together. It doesn't work that way. Everybody scatters and then they have to regroup. And in order to do that, there had to be separate communication systems in place. So, some of the interventions that were actually developed by the military were put in place. One of the interesting things that happened back in the late 90s is after we had an expose on ABC News 2020 about the work that we had done. The couple of days later, I got a 17-page letter from a military person named J.G. Brady. And in this letter, he talked about how the military had been researching radio frequency radiation health effects since World War II, and that there were several interventions that had already been identified. So that, in the one sense, the military has weaponry and all of that, but in another sense, they also have done some work to help us with protection.
Hi. Jessica O'Kane. I'm with the Anne Arundel Coalition Against Cell Towers at Schools. I want to thank you for doing this presentation today. And would you also agree that it's effing, or whatever your medical term was, that it is irresponsible for school boards to approve 100-foot cell phone towers up to 3 with 5 sets of co-locating on school grounds? Do you think that's not really responsible?
Well, if you look at the biological activity coming from the signals, and you have co-location, as you were talking about, you're creating a cacophony that is going to be more biologically active than any individual signal. So, the answer is yes. The same comment applies.
Yes, Dr. Sharma. Yes. Would you also comment on this?
No, I didn't get you exactly.
The question is about cell phone towers.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a good idea to have a 100-foot tall cell phone tower on a school ground with multiple antennas on it?
No, I don't think so. This is corrected by, because on cell phone ground, then also because the radiation, because you see, I didn't show you this slide where how these radiation are emitted from the cell phone tower. The main beam, wherever it's going, the main beam is main responsible, and somewhere, certainly some of your classrooms or other these areas where most of the times these children are there, they are going to be exposed, and they are very dangerous. And as her presentation clearly indicated, so where the children are concerned, they have got a lot of bottom contents in compared to the adults. So the ions are more, the absorptions of these radiation in children are very high. So that's not at all safe.
The problem
what
is
the recommendation of the Indian government about locating towers
No,
on schools?
what my committee recommended that we should not at all install any cell phone tower in a school or nearby school, as well as in the hospitals area. It should be out of the. Rather, I am thinking to remove all these mega cell phone tower or macro cell phone tower from the highly densely populated area. It should go out of this populated area, and then we can bring these radiations by using micro or pico or small cell phone tower, which have got less power.
Thank you. I just want to say one thing. The problem the parents are having is that they are precluded from the 1996 Telecommunications Act for bringing up any adverse health effects and having any of these applications denied. So you have to rely on home values, depreciating, and aesthetics to try and sway public opinion against having these applications approved. And that's what the carriers and the construction companies are relying on and getting away with.
We are well aware that our law prohibits considering health impacts of the location of tower as a matter of law. India has a different law, but there's the same challenge that they're facing from the industry. They try to block them in lawsuits, right? This gentleman and then the lady there.
Yeah. Okay, I'm Carl Polzer. I've been around town as a health policy analyst for 25 years, mostly in health insurance and financing, but as a parent, I got involved in this about 12 years ago. We're in Fairfax County across the river. There's a couple 100,000 kids in the school system and a $2 billion school board. And cell phones were just coming in. So my wife sent this health policy analyst's husband an article about health effects. So I read about 200 studies. I don't have any training in biology. But, I mean, a little bit now. But anyhow, then I found out that the school board was selling space at every school like fish. They had a map where you could go to with a contract.
Sell the towers.
Okay.
So the schools get money.
No. They had made a contract with a company called Milestone Communications, and you could go on and see the altitude, longitude, and latitude of every school. And it was for the PTA got them. They had a contract where the PTA would sign off, and it was all hooked up so they'd get acceptance.
For the towers to the school.
So we fought it for a year and a half, and I had a website. Protect schools, and we got emails from all over the world. This issue was up everywhere. And if you guys had been available then, I think the science has advanced. As an observer, I kind of got out of the issue for a few years. Yes, there's a lot more. The evidence that there's a biological effect is greatly increased. And it's wonderful that you are working on it, and I read your book when I was doing all this. But the social acceptance and the power of the industry has geometrically increased.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And that preemption, at the time, was misunderstood. Federal preemption, I saw it in healthcare,
Right.
comes into play in health insurance. So I was very familiar, the industry stuck it in there in the Telecom Act. It didn't say, they say you can't bring it up as a health, you can bring it up, but not as the primary, at least at the case law when I was in on this, the case law said you could mention it, but it couldn't be the primary reason that a local entity could deny the siting. And under the Telecommunications Act, the federal government basically says this is our domain, it puts an electric fence around it, the states can't do anything on this, but it delegates to local zoning authorities the ability to site. So it basically gives them no power.
So how much money does a typical school get for one of these co-located towers?
So I tried everything. I tried the evidence, but I had an ulterior motive of educating people about, me and my friend that did it, the phones and the wireless networks. They would get nothing almost. In fact, the cost to the school, what we showed in a memo, the only thing that changed their policy, they were very stubborn, they're very arrogant. And so people said you would never change their policy. I showed them that the cost to the school board would be greater than any revenue they would get.
What was the revenue in the beginning?
It was like I couldn't remember all the details, something like $8,000 a year.
$8,000 a year.
8 or 10 or 15, whatever you would.
Right.
But then you have trucks coming in and out. I brought a guy in from New York showing
Diesel.
even the physical, threat of ice falling off the Empire State Building and chopping people up. Kids climbing on it. Brought in pictures of lightning smashing up 20 cell phone towers a year. Had guy, the health officer from Salzburg, where they had much stricter standards. Write the Post, had a big debate on the Post, back and forth. Magda Havis, I got her to write in, and and then I was fighting these guys, but the thing with it under Virginia law, the thing that got them was because it wasn't. One of my main problems with it is you're using this school grounds for industrial use that has a side effect. It has a bio, would you put a pig farm on there? Would you put
And then after the IARC said it was a possible human carcinogen, it just seemed to me that in and of itself ought to be pretty dissuasive. But you know that a campaign was launched. A campaign was launched after the World Health Organization declared cell phone radiation and wireless radiation a possible human carcinogen. A campaign in the media was launched to try to discredit it. And so I talked to many, many scientists, including people here at the School of Public Health, most of whom who are not attending, and they don't even know about this.
Right.
And they've never heard about it. Now, I've recently published with other members of the World Health Organization group that I think it's a probable human carcinogen. Now, what other probable human carcinogen would you be exposing school children to? DDT? Lead, engine exhaust, chloroform?
It has nothing to do with the function of the school as a school. And under Virginia law, it turns out that the school board members, because it was a non-educational use, they're responsible for any liabilities, 50% of any liabilities personally.
Yeah.
So they decided, well, maybe we won't. They thought it was safe, but maybe we won't do this except at high schools.
Oh.
So we got like 180 schools off the table. But then later on, they delegated the whole decision making. I went away. You can't do this for free for the rest of your life. So now they delegated back to the PTAs and the schools. So you fight it school by school. But anyhow,
May I suggest that?
It's an example of how hard it is to fight it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes. One comment. In our system, I'll put my lawyer hat on for a minute. In our system, truth and justice are not the same. And the science is on the truth side of the ledger. And, we're trying for 20 years here, trying to have truth prevail. But the justice side is really what is more powerful in some ways. And as parents, you have a 14th Amendment protection to parent the way you believe you should parent. And when a tower or Wi-Fi in schools interfere with your ability to provide safe education for your children, that's protected. Now, no one's ever tried that angle before, but it's real.
It sounds like there's a lot. Dr. Carlo is also a lawyer, and it sounds like there's a lot of interesting things. And I understand your burnout I really do. Because after working on this issue, I never dreamed when I started working on this. And I have had colleagues actually ask me if I had lost my mind. No, in the beginning. I've had colleagues I worked with for many years. I worked at the National Academy of Sciences on many important things, including banning smoking on airplanes and public places. So I understand controversy. I'm no stranger to it. But I've had people actually question my sanity who I worked with for many, many years. So this is not easy to work on. I assume you all know each other. And if you do not, you need to. And I think that I think we had one more question in the back, and then I'd like to strongly suggest that you all go out for coffee right now, because I will close with a reminder from Margaret Mead in a moment. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Kate Keel from Maryland Smart Meter Awareness, and we've taken on the smart meters in Maryland. And I had two quick questions. One is, can you comment, Dr. Sharma, on the state of affairs of smart meters and the utilities co-opting the electric, gas, and water utilities co-opting the RF technology for their thing? Comment on that in India, and also in light of the fact that you said that the carrier waves with voice overlay are more bioactive. And then the second thing is the feasibility of putting where things stand in India with fiber optics and the feasibility of putting a lot of this stuff on fiber.
I will take first the fiber optics. This is you see, when I approached to the government that we have to remove all the cell phone tower from schools and the hospital, then they said that where is the alternative? Then how the connectivity will be, it will be very difficult to provide the connectivity. The answer is the optic fiber. So in so many hospitals now we are providing the fiber optic network for them. So that will be one of the answer, and then certainly we will be taking. So for the smart meter as concerned, in India we have not yet conducted, but so far I understand they may be also having the same type of impact. So far the radiations are concerned. So the concern which are raised by cell phone and cell phone tower, the same thing are with the smart meter too also.
And I think, with regard to the smart meters, again, while there haven't been many studies directly related to smart meters, the underlying mechanisms are the same. When you have a cacophony of waveforms hitting the cell membrane, that's what triggers the biological cascades that can lead to those indirect effects that Dr. Sharma was talking about earlier.
But I was curious particularly about the comment of voice overlay on the carrier, on the data transmission.
It's information. The way the signals work, you have a carrier wave that usually is 1900 megahertz or something like that, and then the pulsing is what allows for the data to be packaged, whether it's information, digital data, voice, or whatever. And
so they're both just as the digital data, so to speak, and the actual voice overlay are both just as bioactive.
They're just both as bioactive because they do not allow the cell membranes to recognize. There's not an attenuation. There's not an adaptation possible because the multiple modulation overlays is what we call them: voice, data, pulsing, different signals in the environment. Dr. Sharma's early slide about atmospheric conditions and all those things that impact, all of those create confusion for the cell. If it changes the wave, it's going to make it confusing for the cell, and it's going to become more bioactive.
And with all of these things, as you know very well, Kate, there's a cumulative effect that we have to be concerned about. And I am not an expert on smart meters, but what I do know is that when we were first told that they only sent a signal once a day, that's just not true.
Right.
And there is a fundamental issue of privacy that people are, I'm astonished when it comes to wearable apps and things. People don't understand. If you wear an app, you're putting yourself in digital jail. You can be tracked all the time. Now, I've recently learned that the iPhone, certain apps on the new iPhone are on all the time, whether you want them or not. The health app, and there's a GPS that apparently is on all the time. So I'm going to investigate that further. And There's no studies showing that it helps anybody to lose weight at all. Okay, what I've seen is there's kind of a fatigue that people start out doing it and then they fall off. Okay, however, it might be a good thing if you use it and you only download to your wireless thing afterwards. In other words, you're not tethered to it. Do you understand? It's tracking your steps, but it's not doing it with a constant connection. But the answer is, I don't know. And it shouldn't be my job to find out. And these things have not been tested before being introduced. And my concern with all of these things, you can put a tag on a child. You can embed it in their skin. You can put an RFID on a child. I have some serious concerns about these things. And I think we need groups like you to get together and never forget that the most powerful thing in our democracy is when a group of concerned citizens gets together and organizes itself to demand what democracy is supposed to give to us. Yes, the task is difficult, but I'll leave you with this thought that is in both of my books. There's a group of workers who are told to do something, and they say, hey, this job is impossible, we can't do it, forget about it, we can't do this. And the response from the rabbi is, it's not up to you to finish the job, but you must begin it. And so that's where I leave you. And thank you for helping us.